Deep Tech Bite. Hello and welcome to episode 2 of Deep Tech Bytes, a 3-part podcast from SGInnovate and me, Neil Moore. So, let's assume for a moment you've started a deep tech company and are fortunate enough to find some funding, maybe even from SGInnovate. You've got to scale quickly, but you still can't afford to offer Silicon Valley salaries and use of the company jet. You need to find believers who'll grow with you. So where do you look? What should you offer them? And how do you keep them when every other startup is as desperate for talent as you are? I don't actually have the answers, but handily, I have 2 human resources with me who do. Today, I'm joined remotely by Kyle Holm, partner and pre-IPO practice leader at Radford Data and Analytics in San Francisco, and Juliana Lim, head of talent networking at SGInnovate right here in Singapore. Thank you for joining me, guys.
Hi.
Thank you.
I'd like to begin the discussion in my favorite way, which is by asking you to explain what your job titles mean. Please, let's start with you, Kyle.
Thank you. I agree. Job title are confusing. That's why my business card has one word, partner. My job title is essentially I lead the private market practice where I'm really focused on 2 clients. One is growing companies that are scaling, those private companies that have just taken on seed money, Series A, Series B as they grow. And then the talent teams at investors. So private equity firms, venture capital firms, innovation firms like SGInnovate. And then that's really, where I'm focused is the human capital component of those clients.
And Juliana, you're just head of all the talent. All the talent belongs to you, right?
I try. I'm a greedy gal. Yes. So essentially, my job is just to ensure that there's the right talent that gets into our deep tech startups. For SGInnovate, we work with very young companies. So where Kyle works with the more mature, later stage ones, I work with those really from a seed stage all the way to about Series B. So they're really young, really small, and because they're not B2C typically, most people don't know about them. And my job is to get out there and be their biggest cheerleader and get them the best possible talent.
Fantastic. Okay, we're going to change your title to head of cheerleading captain. Okay? Marvelous. Okay, so listen, deep tech, as we have discovered in the previous podcast, is reasonably new field, potentially world-changing field. But I'm guessing there's not that much talent around for it, or is there? Or do they just not know deep tech is an option for them? Where does this talent come from? How do you find it, Juliana?
It's from everywhere. I mean, talent, I think you don't have to define it as deep tech talent that way. If you break it down to the really simple parts of the talent that we're looking for, generally they are engineers, folks that know their computer vision, their programming skills. It really depends on the type of startup they're working in. So if it's a robotics related startup, then obviously SLAM would be a very useful language that they need to know. So it depends on the role they're doing, as well as I think their interest. Computer vision, like I said earlier, machine learning, really depends on the role that each person comes on board in a startup.
And where are you finding these people at the moment? Where do they hang out?
Everywhere. They're just like you and I guess, in a coffee shop. They're not aliens, so they're not floating out there in outer space, but they're in the schools, they're at home, they are working, could be professionals in some other sector. But I think it's more the application of what they've learned already and acquiring new skills. So the industry can differ. They can be working in a bank somewhere at this point in time, a data center somewhere. Like I said, it could be a lecturer teaching in the university. So they're everywhere. Yeah.
Carl, do you find that? Are they coming over from other industries, or do you just sit with a flag in the middle of Silicon Valley and they just flock to you? How does it work?
Well, I mean, I think that's exactly right. They are everywhere. And we also, we call it X tech, right? Where, just sub in a word for X and you're going to find somebody that in that space, right? So whether it's education tech or health tech, they really are everywhere. And I think the interesting piece to me is when you think about some of these roles and the capabilities that folks have, historically we think about, wow, somebody's been doing this for 10 years, right? But the technology isn't that old. You can't be doing it for that long. And so your most sort of capable, experienced person may have 6 months of experience, but it's 6 months since that tech was developed.
Exactly.
I don't know if you've seen, there's been a rash of adverts called out over LinkedIn at the moment for employers asking for people who have, 20 years experience in a certain programming language. It's only been around for 5 years. People are getting caught out right now.
Yes.
So listen, as obviously between a startup starts small, maybe it's a couple guys in a garage or in a university basement somewhere, but obviously the idea is to scale it. But between, where it begins and where it ends up, there are a vast number of stages that a company has to go through. So Juliana, what I'm wondering is, who do you need at each stage? Is there a process? Are there certain talents that are essential for a particular stage in a company's development? How does it work?
Okay, so after working with quite a number of startups over the last few years, what we realized is there is a pattern in terms of the hiring needs. So when it's a very young startup, typically we are looking at, more the coding guys, the engineers, people who need to know the tech really well. So functionally, they must be experts in that particular area. As the startup is growing, then of course they bring in different talents. Could be the HR person, the business development person. These people are important because as the startup scaling, they need to have customers. And not all tech guys are the best salespeople. So you need someone who's able to convince the customer why you need to have this product and sell it and then basically grow from there.
That's a great point. I didn't realize, I forgot about, you need those horizontal functions, not just the coders and the programmers and the engineers, but the HR guy, the sales guy, the marketing guy. Carl, are those people sort of flocking in? Is this an interesting industry for them, or do you have trouble winning them over from where they are?
No, I mean, I think that if you have the right technology and you have the right founder who's got a vision that he or she can communicate, I think you can get, really strong talent across those other functions. But really, I think Juliana makes the right point, which is that the founders have to make a commitment to those roles, whether it's sales or HR or finance. They all have tremendous value that they can add.
So can I just jump in just to add one more point? I think the key thing that holds everyone together in a company is really the mission, vision, and the outcomes that everyone's driving towards. It really doesn't matter which part of the production you're in, inverted commas, but I think everyone needs to have very clear mindset as to where they want to go. So if you have that already, then it's a lot easier to steer the ship rather than everyone has a different idea where they need to be. So I like to think of it that way, that when you bring someone on board in the company, they must be driven by that passion. Of course, you pay them a decent salary. You don't underpay, you don't overpay, but something reasonably decent. But what's the most important is that passion, that desire, that common mentality across that you want to succeed as a company, big or small.
In the early days, Juliana, how important is that founder story and that founder character in terms of drawing the right talent outside of, salaries and packages and stuff? Is there a particular founder type that works, a particular charisma?
Okay, so personally, I feel that end of the day is the person, whether you can click with somebody. There must be the ability to connect with others. It doesn't mean this person has to be very charismatic, stand on the stage and win thousands of people over. But I think if you can connect on an individual basis to bring in the right people, it's definitely not the salary. I've heard many people who've turned down high pay because they liked the thing that they were working on and they chose to join something else and not be attracted by the salary. So ultimately, I think founders, especially for the young startups that don't have that credibility behind them, need to be able to convince the talent why they should be joining this little company and what they want to do as a company together. So I think everybody just wants to contribute his or her own way, right? We each have a specialty. And I think the most important part is to be able to bring out each person's individual abilities and strengths so that as a whole, the team succeeds.
It sounds to me like they've got to tell a good story, which is something we're doing here and I'm very passionate about. Now, founders of businesses may well be geniuses, they may be engineers, they may have invented something. It doesn't automatically make them necessarily great managers or great strategists or even great leaders. What are the kinds of mistakes that you see being made by inexperienced founders when they start hiring people, Carl?
Yeah, no, I think you make the right point in terms of founders tend to have a vision. And I think the mistake that a lot of founders make is that they expect the next person that they've got to see that vision and to kind of build upon it. And, sort of communicating that and then identifying folks that sort of get it and build upon it is really an important skill set. sometimes you have founders who, they have trouble letting go, and they want to control all of the decisions. And then you have others that they're more than willing to sort of let something like sales or marketing go, but they're not good at communicating how they see it and sort of allowing for somebody else to grow within that vision. I think the most successful founders are the ones that, just like Juliana said, they get their visions clear, they understand where their gaps are, and then they bring in people and then they empower them to run with it in the area where they're not strong.
How do they do that, Juliana? Is that something that you and SGInnovate can help with?
I think it all starts with self-awareness, which is far and few between, I think. People need to be aware what their team strengths are and where are the gaps, and then bring in the right people. As Kyle says, sometimes letting go, especially when you're very used to being in the driver's seat, is challenging. So for us, what we try to do at SGInnovate's talent team is we work very closely with our founders to try to educate, influence, and basically nudge them along this journey. Most of them is their first time into a startup. I think that hand-holding is very important. It's not just saying, do this, this, and that, and this is the magic formula, but really to demonstrate in very clear ways why they need to do this and how to do it. So the best way I feel is by the startup founders looking at us, listening to us. So sometimes we even sit in for the interviews. We kind of nudge the founders, maybe this is something that you want to ask, or why don't you, before COVID, why don't you bring this person out for tea, just to have a better understanding of that individual. So these are the things that typically my technical founders would not think about. They are very focused on, can this person do this particular job? So bringing that influence and perspective for them, right, I think really helps manage the overall expectations for both parties.
How do they react to that process, your founders, when you say, right, we're going to spend a day sitting down, having tea or coffee with a bunch of people you've never met before? Is this completely new for them?
Yes, some of them have a difficult time, and that's where you have a more extroverted person like myself, right, sitting in and cracking the jokes and say, come on, guys, seriously, I thought you both like Star Wars or something like that. So, end of the day, also we even let me share this story. We even once orchestrated a meeting that appeared accidental, but it was by no way, any means accidental. And it was basically, we were talking to a talent, someone we really wanted for a particular startup. And we kind of made the founder walk past us. And I said, hey, so-and-so, why don't you join us for coffee? So it looked so natural, right? And then I was like, oh, you guys have a lot in common. And then the guys hit it off, which was quite cute. So it was not a formal sit-down interview setting for that particular case. And I thought that was successful because both of them were a bit like, the talent was like, I'm not exactly looking. And then the founder's like, I'm really bad at interviews. So I thought, okay, let's do something a little bit different. And
you're a matchmaker, Juliana. I love it. What a lovely job you have. What a lovely thing to spend your day doing. So Carl, I'm trying to get my head around this. I'm a startup founder. I'm passionate about my idea. I think it has, world-changing implications, but I have no money. How do I go about attracting great talent?
Yep.
I want to raise money, of course I do, but up to that point, I need some people to help me get to that point. How do I get them on board?
Yeah, and this is, Silicon Valley was built, on that exact idea of we have no cash, we have a great idea. How do I bring you on board? Well, I'm going to give you a piece of the pie. I'm going to incent you with equity. If this idea works out, you're going to be like an owner and you're going to share in the wealth creation. And, Silicon Valley was in many ways founded on the stock option because that was the currency. If you look at some of the earlier companies, that were there, kind of the foundational companies going back, right? Cisco way back. And, even before that, HP, and again with Yahoo. But it was always the first 10 employees that received options and worked for quote unquote nothing, right, are the ones that never needed another job. And so, I think that's where we go all kind of back to why that vision is so important for the founders, because you're selling them on a vision for an idea, you're creating something, and then you're bringing them in with equity to sort of go along for the ride and help them. You're going to give them a slice of the pie, and then you're all going to work together to make that pie as big as possible.
How big a slice, Carl? How big's the slice I give away?
How big a slice? Well, it's a great question. And I think in the absence of data, we see founders make mistakes all the time because, one of the things you asked about, well, what's one of the mistakes founders make? One of the mistakes they make is treating their first hire like they're going to be the head of something, right? So I may be, hiring an engineer to help with the product. It's my IP, I'm the founder, but I need an engineer to help me code. Just because it's the first engineer, do I give them, 2% of the company like I would a CTO? Probably not, right? But in the absence of data, in the absence of understanding what the marketplace is, you see that all the time. When we work with clients that are kind of going, say from their series, their seed round, right, friends and family, to their series A, a lot of times that's when we're taking a look at the cap table to kind of understand what's been done. And many times there are folks that, are very far down in the organization with very high equity levels because they got in first and the founder sort of didn't know what they were doing. Juliana introduced them at a coffee shop and he said, yeah, here's 1%. So yeah, it definitely is a challenge that I think founders have of trying to build this, tell this story. And then when they got somebody, provide the right incentive and the right value and not too much and not too little.
Deep Tech Byte. So Kyle, it sounds like there is data available. There are precedents for how much equity to give to whom and when in Silicon Valley. But what about Singapore, Juliana? Do we have these data sets? Are we developing them?
Not to the degree that I would like to see, frankly speaking. And I think there's a lot more that we can do in Asia to find out this data. And Kyle and I have been discussing about something we want to do here, as in what's happening in Silicon Valley and overseas. The market's a little bit more mature. So they've passed the time of data collection when the startups were very young. But for us, I think this is a precedent. This is something that we want to do. We are at a point in time, right, where I think we're starting on this journey, and getting that data over a long period of time would give us something very valuable. So over to you, Kyle. Maybe you want to tell them a little bit more about the project that we are hoping to do together.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we're taking the model that we've used in Silicon Valley, which is really to start with the early stage investors and the incubators like SGInnovate, and really say, okay, let's start there. Now, we have a global data platform that we can take in data. It's highly confidential. We're able to put it out and anonymize it. And we've got essentially a program where we can collect it at sort of as easy as possible for the companies to give so that we can then put out a survey. When we look at marketplaces, and I think, if you started Silicon Valley, it's kind of been around the longest. It's got the most complete ecosystem in terms of, it's got investors, it's got companies that have grown from garage to public, and then it's got, sort of the talent around it. One of the key items that's there, right, is everybody understands the levels of compensation, even at the early stage companies, because we have complete surveys. This is what I think Singapore needs. And thankfully, we've worked with Juliana and we've worked with some of the companies, and we've got a great partnership going where, the two of us are going to sponsor something together to try to spearhead this, hopefully get it off the ground this year, and just continue to build on it, because what we really want is that gold standard in the marketplace where, the companies can go to and know, okay, these are the levels. Let's take some of the mystery out of this and simply, build the right program.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds very exciting. And I'm guessing deep tech founders, they love that data. So I think they're going to pay attention to that.
It's definitely vital, yeah.
One of the data sets that I think is becoming important is around diversity. Every industry is grappling with diversity at the moment. And Kyle, just to go back to what you were telling us about equity and providing equity in lieu of sort of salary or a competitive salary up front.
Yeah.
That sounds great in the long run, but in the short term, if I don't have money to rely on, that could be difficult, and it could dissuade people who don't come from moneyed backgrounds, and I'm thinking perhaps from minority backgrounds, from getting involved. Is there anything the industry is doing about this? Is there anything we can do about this?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I mean, you have the famous stories of, millionaire engineers living 10 to a house because they were, bootstrapping. And we do need to make it more accessible. And I think it actually starts with the investors and how the investors think about the employees that are a part of their portfolio companies. You're going to invest in things that essentially are going to give you a good return. And I don't think historically, the investors have looked deep enough into some of the talent pools that exist that are outside of, sort of where they've always looked. And I think, as Juliana mentioned, we're sort of in this moment now where I think even the VCs are reflecting on kind of the repetition that they've had, because what it's brought, right, is a lot of issues. There's Uber's probably the most recent kind of famous one that really had a toxic culture, but it, at one point it was a startup. So I think, really for me, I think this is one of those, it's time for a change. And I do think that the investors are the ones that are really thinking the most about this and can have kind of the biggest impact.
Juliana, are you seeing sort of policy-linked investment? We'll invest under certain circumstances, and diversity might be one of those things. Is that one of the things we could do to encourage it? We kind of have a clean slate here. What can we do?
Yeah, I'm quite heartened, I think, because we are so young, right, in this journey, that we can see the mistakes others have made. And from there, learn from them. I think the most stupid thing you can do is not learn from the mistakes of others and just follow suit. So I'm heartened to think of investors as maturing in that way, looking at others and saying, hey, this is something we need to seriously think about. So I've worked with investors that come to me and said, we want to give them money, but they need to hire this type of person. Somebody that is able to do this and that, somebody who brings the team to another level, brings a diversity aspect to it in terms of thinking, in terms of experience, etc. So it's very easy for very young startups to kind of have that herd mentality, right? Because the founder is young, then he or she might just want to work with young people and not consider someone a little bit more mature, more experienced. There's also that fear factor, because I've never worked with that type of person. Can I deal with, that person's needs, etc., etc.? So I think that whole journey, everyone is learning from it. And because we have a pretty good ecosystem community, everybody kind of comes together when they need help, right? So you can easily reach out to a friend, call a friend, or you can go to one of the SGInnovates and mix and mingle and find out from others what they're doing and listen in to others what they're doing. We are at an age where technology has made it so simple to connect with other people. That barrier to that knowledge information is really low now. So I think reaching out and getting that diversity into the startups, into companies, is a conversation we need to have and continue to have.
I think that's great. And, we need to have it earlier and earlier, because sometimes I find, diversity becomes a concern once a load of money's been raised and there's an HR director and all sorts. But what we know is that if we don't have diverse thinking early on, biases get baked into the algorithms, Correct. They get baked into the systems. And by the time they scale, the knock-on effect of that can be disastrous. So I think it's really, really good that we are actively working to bring more diversity in at earlier stages to avoid that outcome. I think that's brilliant. Now, I want to get into the nitty-gritty of what people can and shouldn't be able to do when they join these startups. So what are some of the qualifications or the skill sets or the attributes that you think talent in the deep tech ecosystem should possess at the moment, Juliana?
Like I said, it really depends on the role. So if it's a very technical role, obviously the person must have the relevant knowledge in programming skills, coding, etc. Those kind of stuff, that's the basic, the hygiene factors. After that, obviously, if the person has a bigger type thinking in terms of being able to see the moving parts in the company, that will be useful too. The ability to get one's hands dirty and not just be focused on his or her area of expertise. I think that's important in a very young startup, because we need to have people who are flexible, who are able to change and pivot with the company. And sometimes that's not just a skill, that is a mindset change. And humans aren't always the most adaptive. I think some of us are quite resistant to change. So that ability to change your mindset and go with the flow is very important. Be able to be critical thinkers and see it from a bigger perspective. A lot of times I work with people that don't see that bigger perspective. They just see a particular job they're doing. And then I say, hey, do you consider this, this, and that, right? And they go like, no, that's something that we never considered. We were so obsessed with building the perfect product that we didn't see that the perfect product will cost us so much money to produce. So it doesn't become viable, right? If it's going to cost a lot to produce one item, in terms of scalability and whatnot. So these are the things I think that folks need to think about, and that the talents that we are looking at need to have that technical skills, the people skills. Yes and no, depends on the job, but the ability to be critical thinkers, I think that's very important.
I like this idea that it's not just technical skills that count, and actually we need, I guess, different types of personalities. We need people who are adventurous or imaginative or innovative. There's only so much room for mad geniuses in every organization, maybe one or two at max. Kyle, is there a way in which we can identify personalities? Are you using tests or systems? Is there a process by which we can make sure we get that balance?
There's certainly assessment tools that you can get at some of these things. And they've gotten better and better if you think about, what you're looking for. And I think you're absolutely right. You can only have too many mad scientists. But I think, the other thing that I would build on Juliana's point is I think we really need to have people that can think big, right? It's fine to build something, incrementally. But I think in the startup environment, you want to have folks that are able to think at scale. And so, I do think the assessment tools that exist can help identify those skills. And I would say, one of the keys is when you find somebody that kind of checks all those boxes, just stick with them. One of the things companies tend to do is they tend to hope that the person who's kind of not showing it will eventually show it. And, you've got one person that's showing it and four that are just doing okay. Pay attention to the one and don't spend all of your time with the four.
Deep Tech Bite. Let's say we've built our startup, we've got some money, we're scaling. We have problems that have emerged around cultures in these startups, toxic cultures, be they, highly sort of charged masculine atmospheres or the hustle culture. There are a number of sort of different brands of this toxic culture. How can we mitigate that? We've seen it happen. We can learn from it. Kyle, what can we learn from Silicon Valley?
Well, we can learn that it starts at the top and that vision that we talked about comes from the founder, and how the founder behaves, how the founder treats people, how the founder thinks about, other things besides the core of what the business does are all critical to the culture. And respecting, that everybody contributes is sort of where it starts. I think the big mistake or one of the big causes of this kind of toxic culture that you're talking about, right, is, many of these companies are disruptive. They're intentionally disruptive. They're disrupting the taxi industry. They're disrupting whatever it is. And that's fine if it's the core of your business, right? But we don't want to be disrupting HR, right? We don't want to be disrupting, finance. I think in order to sort of maintain that positive atmosphere that we want, we have to remember that we're running a business and there's got to be respectful and there's got to be respect. And we've got to understand that people are going to come from all kinds of different backgrounds and everything doesn't need to be disrupted.
Disrupt, pick your targets for disruption. Juliana, what are your thoughts on that? And also, how responsible are the investors who come on board later in defining the culture? If we have shareholders who are pushing for a quicker IPO, quicker returns, this can impact culture as well. Where do you think the nexus is between sort of creating a good culture and also delivering for your founder, for your shareholders, things like that?
So like what Kyle mentioned, I think the first person or the founders are very vital in terms of building that initial culture. But let's not forget that everyone you hire to the company also kinds of change the dynamics within that company. So I think it's a concerted effort. It's like a relationship that you have to build upon. And you cannot rely on just one or two people to build that culture for you. Everybody that comes on board kinds of adjusts, shifts, and influences that culture, whether they knowingly do it or not. And together, I think that they need to be clear as an organization where they want to go. So it's always good to get back together and everyone's talking about it openly. The idea that respect is very important, right? So that's something that you cannot run away from. At the same time, what does respect mean then? How's the definition look like? So these are things that the HR department team, right, they can kind of work together and say, okay, this is something we need to do. So HR is not about operations. It's not about paying people salary on time. It's not just about hiring people and making sure you fill a vacancy. HR has also a lot of soft components that people tend to forget, which is like what you mentioned, that building culture, helping senior management, calling senior management or calling people out when things go a little bit astray, right? And you want to continue that. And that's the job of the HR department, as well as everybody, to move that in a positive direction. So as to the question as to, the stakeholders and such, typically for my companies, because they're so small, the stakeholders, which are the investors, don't really look at this culture thing as a very big thing because there's only a couple of them, or, it's not a big organization to the point that you have to manage thousands of people already. So that's not typically something that they would necessarily focus on as the first thing.
I'm starting to think, though, that the moment let's say I'm a startup founder, I get some money, the HR director is starting to seem like one of the most important hires I can make, being that culture is defined by every individual you hire subsequently. So I think that's a really interesting point. Now, I want to turn it around. We've talked about it from the company's point of view, what they need to do. I just want to think about from the candidate's point of view right now. How do they go about finding these deep tech companies? How do they go about applying to them? Which coffee shops do they need to hang out in, Juliana? How do I get into this industry?
Now it's a bit challenging, right, due to COVID and whatnot. So, which is why I'm glad you asked that question, Neil, because we are having a virtual event on the 12th of September. And that's going to showcase more than 200 deep tech roles and opportunities. There'll be training programs for people, free, short 2-hour type workshops to introduce them about what is machine learning, stuff like that. And for those who are thinking, is this a space for me? Do I want to get involved? How do I do it? It's a very good introductory platform. And that's happening on the 12th of September. That's a Saturday, and whole day from 9 to 5, thereabouts. And more information will be published on our website.
And for those that are listening to this on demand retrospectively, is this a regular thing that SGInnovate does, or can we expect it to happen more regularly?
Regularly, we used to have a lot of activities, or we still do have a lot of activities. It's just online now, and it is topic specific. So it could be an area, for example, clean energy, and there'll be a panel, and anyone can just sign on and listen in. Or come to our events if there's ever a case like that again. But for the 12th Sep event, it's something new. It's a virtual talent showcase. Like I said, there'll be booths, up to 30 booths featuring different companies, all hiring. There'll also be programs for students all the way to your PMET, so your professionals, managers, etc., mid-career guys and girls who are interested into getting to this space. So that's the first time we're doing this on a virtual kind of scale. Yeah, let's see how that goes.
Very innovative. And I'm guessing we can find out about that at SGInnovate.com. And Kyle, let's say I'm lucky enough to win an interview with one of these incredible new dynamic deep tech startups. What should I be asking for?
I think you should be asking, first of all, what I would say is, your role is going to be what you're looking for, right? So, and I think if you're coming in and you expect to be able to contribute fairly significantly to the company, then you should be asking for a piece of the pie. And as much as you can afford it, right, there's a trade-off. How big of a piece of the pie is kind of dependent on both the company's sort of appetite for sharing, but also, typically there's a cash and equity trade-off. And so I think it's one of those questions where if you really believe in it, I would say you'd be willing to give up some cash for a bigger piece. And certainly that's how I would approach joining a company like that.
Excellent tangible advice. So attend the virtual fair on the 12th of September and go in there with an idea in your head of where you stand on the cash equity trade-off. Perfect. Guys, this has been a fantastic discussion. Very enlightening. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining me and my guests for part 2 of this 3-part series from SGInnovate Exploring Deep Tech. SGInnovate's mission is to help entrepreneurial scientists build deep tech startups to solve some of the world's hardest problems. In the next episode, we tackle the problem of taking your startup global through deep tech ecosystems. Whether you're an entrepreneur or investor, recruiter or recruitee, subscribe to Deep Tech Bytes on iTunes and Spotify and join the fastest growing deep tech community in Singapore at SGInnovate.com.